Yesterday, the fraud trial of the Trump organization in general began. Trump stood on the courthouse steps, had a lot to say about the judge, about Letitia James, who is the Attorney General of New York and who ran her campaign in 2018 based on the idea that she would go after Trump. And I think a lot of people are still confused about exactly what this case is, and it's understandable because we've got the New York City criminal trial, we've got the D.C. criminal trial, we've got South Florida criminal trial, and we've got the Atlanta criminal trial. This is civil. And I feel like, Buck, a lot of people still don't understand the difference between civil and criminal court. The easiest way to put it is in civil court, typically you are seeking monetary damages for a wrong, whereas in criminal court, typically, the punishment would be a lack of freedom that an individual potentially would face in the event that they are found to have committed a criminal violation. So we're on the civil side right now. There are 4 criminal trials still pending for Trump, but this is on the civil side. And there are different standards of justice beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal trial. More likely than not, basically a probability standard, 50% plus a feather is one way that it's put, that something did or did not happen. Also confusing, I think, to a lot of people, this is a bench trial, not a jury trial. That is, the judge will make the decisions about whether or not there has been a violation by the Trump organization. And essentially this case boils down, for everybody out there, to did the Trump organization, did they inflate the value of properties that were owned by the Trump organization in an effort to get as much money in loans, potentially at a lower rate, than they otherwise might have been entitled to based on the valuation of these properties? Was there fraud perpetrated? Now, Buck, what you and I have hammered home here, and I think this is important, and that's a quick background of exactly what the synopsis is here. What you and I have hammered home is, and this is important, there's no victim here. I have not heard, I think JP Morgan was the bank in question. There may have been multiple banks. For people out there who have never, I mean, it's not that much different than what you might do when you go around and decide to take out a mortgage. A lot of people go to multiple banks and they say, hey, here are my finances. Can you give me, what rate can you give me on potentially buying this home? A lot of you pre-qualify if you're going to be out shopping for homes. Buck, you just bought a home. I'm sure you went through this process in many ways. Most of our listeners probably at some point in their life will go through taking out a mortgage. This is just basically a huge credit line that the Trump organization wanted to get at the most favorable rates possible, and they were using all of their assets as the leverage to justify the money that they were going to take out. All of the loans were repaid, Buck. There is literally not $1 in damages that can be pointed to here, and they potentially are trying to get hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties based on a loan that never went bad, was fully repaid, and nobody has complained about. That's the story.
Now, what they'll argue, and I think this will also hinge somewhat on New York law and how it's written with regard to this, but by inflating assets, he gets a more favorable rate, and therefore the losses to the banks are the change in the rate as it pertains to what he would pay for those loans, right? So instead of, let's say, if you're getting a mortgage these days, it's like 7% something, almost 8% now, right?
Yep.
Oh, well, you inflated your assets, so you got a 5 or a 6% mortgage rate instead. So that's where they're going to try. I mean, you're talking about JP Morgan. They're very sophisticated. They know what these assets are. There's always gray area in deciding what assets like this are worth. That's where I think that the Trump side of this is clearly in the right. I mean, this is a preposterous case, but they are going to say, well, the inflation of the assets gave him a financial advantage, which meant less dollars going to the lenders in this case. Like, it's going to be some version of that, right? And, the judge clearly does not like Trump. The judge also likes the attention from this, as we have discussed. But Donald Trump has been speaking out very directly on all this. And here he is, saying, this is him this morning. This is cut, 15, please, talking about his net worth. Play 15.
Judge Engoron has been given false and extremely misleading information about my net worth. Private company, nobody's supposed to know my net worth, but now everybody is and will, and I hope you're impressed. We built a great company. But he's been given false information, misleading information, and corrupt information by a very corrupt and incompetent Attorney General, Letitia James. This woman is grossly incompetent. She ran on the basis, I will get Trump without knowing anything about me. So he's been given this information. It's now been proven to be false, such as Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, being worth $18 million when in fact it's much closer to $1.5 billion.
So he's taking this now because it's a civil trial. I think also he just has much more leeway, Clay, than he probably would than he will in any of the criminal trials that may be forthcoming to say whatever he wants to say about all of this stuff. But yeah, he's out there fighting, no question about it.
State of New York, Buck, is going to spend millions of dollars prosecuting a victimless crime on the civil side, while they simultaneously are not prosecuting violent crimes on a regular basis on the criminal side. And so if I were a New York State taxpayer, certainly if I was a New York City taxpayer, I would be very unhappy with what I believe is a misallocation of resources as it pertains to where the focus is. Here is the truth. If Donald Trump had never decided to enter into politics, there would not be, I legitimately believe this, I don't think there would be a single aspect of certainly the criminal trials, but I don't think there would be any civil investigation of him that ever would have ensued. No investigation of the Trump organization. This is from the moment that he decided to run, and I should clarify that. If he had run as a Democrat, none of this would have happened, Buck.
Clay, what is more likely? I mean, if you take Occam's razor to this situation, that, Donald Trump faces 4 criminal indictments and then this civil case all in a year that coincides with his reelection efforts, just happenstance, or there's an effort to get him. I mean, this is what there's been a decision made by the system that he is to be stopped, he's to be undermined, and really he's to be destroyed. I do think that there's a lot that will come together in the J6 case specifically, where they're going to try to get a conviction there, and they're going to try to have major sanctions against Trump if he is in fact convicted in that DC case.
Here's another way of putting that, Buck. What are the odds that Trump lived in New York City for over 50 years as a highly public individual of high net worth, engaged in business deals all the time, and never committed a criminal violation, but suddenly at the age of 74, 75, 76, he became a criminal mastermind such that 4 different criminal trials had to be brought against him, and that all of these civil investigations of the Trump organization also needed to occur. I mean, again, to your point on Occam's razor, we talked about that awful murder down in Chattanooga. The best predictor of future behavior, sadly, is past behavior. If you've been arrested, as we just said in D.C. as well, the data reflects that the average murderer in D.C. has been arrested 11 times prior. The guy who just got murdered in Chattanooga, totally innocent, at his high school reunion, the guy who murdered him had been arrested 66 times. What are the odds that Trump, I don't think, Buck, correct me if I'm wrong, our staff can look it up, I don't think he's ever been charged with a criminal offense in his entire life prior to this year.
And he also is, he lost a civil case, a civil rape trial.
Yes.
And has to pay a $5 million. I mean, all these things. It is hard to keep in mind all of the different ways the legal system is being used to try and undermine, stop, destroy Trump, whichever one, you want to pick. It's hard to keep track of them because so many of them are happening, and so many of them are happening at the same time.
Here's an easy way to bring this home, and this would be a great research subject for somebody. Has anyone at the age of 77 who has never been charged with a felony in their entire life suddenly been charged with felonies in 4 different jurisdictions at the age of 77? I bet that has never happened in the history of the United States. Think about that for a minute. Just the markers that I just laid out. I believe I'm correct that Trump has never been charged with any criminal offense in his whole life. Most people are charged with criminal offenses in their youth, right? 20s, 30s, 40s, testosterone, men, criminal offenses tend to peak in the 20 to 40 year window for men. Okay? How many people at the age of 77, never having faced criminal charges in their entire life, suddenly faced criminal charges in 4 different jurisdictions for the first time ever at the age of 77? I bet, Buck, that has never happened in the history of the United States. Because the probability of somebody over the age of 75 being charged with a criminal offense for the first time is very low in the first place, right? Because typically people in their 70s are very unlikely. Your grandpa and your grandma are very unlikely to lead a life of zero criminal offenses and then suddenly get arrested at the age of 77. Like, if your grandma got popped, you'd be like, what, the FBI just raided grandma's house? Like, grandpa's house?
I think
like,
Madoff
what did they do?
I think Madoff was in his 70s, but, it's
Was
not
that 4 different jurisdictions, though?
No. But
Yeah.
It was a lot of charges.
It took a long time to catch him. And I mean, like, you can say, okay, like, there's a serial killer who has, maybe gotten away with everything and suddenly they catch him with DNA. I think that sometimes happens. But my point on a lot of those guys is they're committing the crimes. They just aren't being caught for them, right? Trump is being charged for crimes now that are currently occurring, right? And there's no indication that he's ever committed any crimes before. If you're a serial killer and you don't get caught till you're 70, you probably killed somebody in your 20s, 30s, 40s along the way. You're right. Madoff got away with his scam for some time, but he didn't get charged in 4 different jurisdictions to my recollection.
And also completely unrelated crimes, right? It's like, to your analogy or to
Yes.
the point you're making, if, Madoff was charged with like grand theft auto and fraud
Yes.
and, classification, document violations, then that would be a little bit more comparable. I mean, grand theft auto would be a little crazy, but you get what I'm saying.